Welcome back, everybody. Hope everyone is doing well. My name is Jason. I will be your host on this CFL talk show, Hussey's Huddle. In this video, we put a cap on the 2021 CFL regular season, and I'm really excited to talk about the future outlooks for the three non-playoff teams. I want to focus on them a lot in this video, and as well react to the few takeaways I did have from Week 16 in the CFL. Before we get started, if you want to support the show, the best way to do it is by hitting the like button and subscribing to Hussey's Huddle for more CFL content just like this. I greatly appreciate it. And with that said, let's get into it with the main game. You got to take stuff away from it because it's the only one that mattered in terms of the standings, was Montreal and Ottawa, the first game of Week 16. And it looked like Montreal had it the whole way, right? 18-3 at half. I mean, led by a touchdown going into the final 5 minutes of the game. They get a good drive going, and then they get stuffed inside of the Ottawa 20-yard line in the red zone. And the rookie running back puts the ball on the ground, and Ottawa goes on an incredible drive and wins the game. So, what do I take away from this? Well, not a whole lot, honestly. I think it was a very fluky game, and how Ottawa was able to make enough plays to win the game. I'm not going to hold this against Montreal going forward too much, because I really think it was just due to those two fumbles that really gave Ottawa life in this game. I believe both of their touchdowns came off of those two turnovers, so they got to clean that up. But William Stanback, they rested him for the second half, and it was kind of an iffy decision maybe, but Hamilton probably would have won their game anyway, so they were most likely going to Hamilton anyway. So I don't think it really matters too much from the perspective of the Alouettes. But for the Ottawa Redblacks, man, you got to be happy for this team. I'm really happy for the Ottawa Redblacks. When I saw that and the guts to go for two to win the game by head coach Paul LaPolice, who had a rough year with this team, dealing with the talent that had been assembled for him. I mean, who knows how much of a role he had in terms of assembling this roster in consultation with GM Marcel Desjardins. He had a lot to do with Matt Nichols coming to town. But overall, I think LaPolice, well, he didn't have a great year on the coaching front. I think he definitely deserves another year. And I was really happy to see a really great guy, I think, in terms of his time in the CFL, him get a win there in the final minute there. And just an incredible performance by the Ottawa Redblacks, showing a lot of resiliency, taking advantage of that situation. Caleb Evans, you know, this guy can make some plays. Like, honestly, I'm not going to say he's going to be a full-time CFL starter day one next year, but I think he's definitely played himself into a roster spot somewhere in the CFL, guaranteed, even if Ottawa decides not to bring him back next year. So it's going to be really interesting to see what Ottawa does with their quarterback situation going forward. And so I want to talk about them for a second here and what their outlook is going forward into the offseason. So I think it really starts with fixing this offensive line that looks in complete shambles. In front of all these quarterbacks that they've had play for them this season, they really haven't played well for really any of them. And Caleb Evans, the guy that's the most mobile of the quarterbacks that they've had back there, has had the most success because he has the ability to move around, give this offense a little more juice in the running game with his legs. And it's going to be really interesting to see what they do to try to improve this offensive line going into next year. I really think they have the ability with some of these pieces that they have. I think Mark Cordy at center, who was their offensive lineman nominee basically by default because he was the only one that was pretty much a constant on that line this season. They tried so many different combinations. I think they set like a record or something like that for the most consecutive games to start a season, starting a different offensive line combination, something crazy like that. And it really just speaks to how big those off-season retirements of Alex Mateus at center really meant to this team. And even though they were a pretty poor offensive line in 2019, they were not on this level as being one of the worst offensive lines I've seen in the last several years of me watching the CFL. So I think starting at the offensive line position is really key for this Red Blacks team going forward, to give whatever quarterback they're going to have back there, whether that's Caleb Evans or whether it's somebody else that they go and grab in free agency, a fighting chance back there, because it was a disaster, one of the worst offensive lines I've seen over the last several seasons in the CFL. And then my thoughts on BC and Edmonton. I mean, in terms of the game, I don't know how much you can really take away. I think you have to take everything in this game with a grain of salt, because the Elks were playing their third game in 7 days, and this is just an unprecedented circumstance. So I don't know how much stock you can put in Nathan Rourke's great performance in terms of how well he performed for the BC Lions in this game. I'm really happy to see a Canadian quarterback excel nonetheless. And I do think Nathan Rourke has a good future with the BC Lions. I think they really will give him a legitimate chance to be their future starter. And I think they've really shown that by giving him significant playing time so early in his career. It really shows you how ready he is to be really a true CFL rookie and get in here really right away. So happy to see him succeed. But again, you got to pump the brakes if you're saying, oh, he should replace Michael Riley going into the 2022 season. But that leads me to the BC Lions offseason, which is, I really wonder what they're going to do with the quarterback situation. So there's a report out there, I think it's 3 Down Nation, was saying that that if the BC Lions cannot agree to a restructured contract with Michael Riley, they plan to potentially cut him. And that would be really interesting because I think Michael Riley would be very sought after on the CFL free agent market. I think a lot of teams would view him as a potential upgrade to their current situation. Like maybe a team like Toronto, maybe a team like Hamilton, maybe looks in terms of being both of those guys in Hamilton are free agents this offseason. A lot of these quarterbacks are free agents, so there's a lot of contract flexibility with these guys. Michael Riley is not one of those guys that's a free agent, but he could potentially join that group. So I'm really interested to see what the BC Lions decide to do if Michael Riley agrees to a lower salary, because I believe he's still the highest paid player in the league. I think it's really a smart move if Riley wants to stay, and I think he does. I don't think he ultimately moves anywhere. I think he's the starting quarterback for the BC Lions at the beginning of the 2022 season. But I think they really do need to lessen that load on the salary cap and use that to invest in other positions. I think this defensive line, they tried to go really cheap. They tried to go with basically an all-rookie defensive line outside of J.R. Tavai. And there were some guys that had playing experience like Boom Gwacham in other leagues such as the XFL. But honestly, not a whole lot of CFL experience on that defensive line for the BC Lions to start out this season. And honestly, it backfired on them greatly because I believe they finished last in the CFL in sacks. And, I mean, besides that, they were really getting gashed by the run at certain points this season. Very smaller kind of defensive line. So the BC Lions really very disappointing season in that respect. And I really think they need to address that defensive line as well as that offensive line, which is a continual problem for this team that got worse as the season went on this year. For the Edmonton Elks, this is a great timing for this video because of the firings that went on today with the Jamie Elizondo firing, the Brock Sunderland firing, and the CEO firing. I forget the guy's name again. It's just slipping my mind at this moment. But, I mean, just a really disappointing season. I had picked them to win the Grey Cup this year. I thought that highly of this roster going into the season. I had thought they had great Canadian talent. I thought they had great Canadian depth. I thought they had a really good offensive line depth, which is crucial in the CFL. I think they had a good quarterback in Trevor Harris that, yes, he had never won a Grey Cup before, but he had been to a Grey Cup and had playoff success. And I thought Jamie Elizondo bringing in a familiar face for Trevor Harris would make him even better in this offense. And obviously that did not happen. And the Elks really had a horrible season in all respects. I think a lot of these players took a step back this year in terms of guys that showed promise in 2019, such as Devon Smith. Kwaku Boateng had his worst CFL season in his 4th year here in Edmonton. And I think that is ultimately what did them in here and why they could not have won more games. And even though they did get some pleasant surprises, James Wilder Jr. was a pretty good addition in the backfield. Aaron Grimes coming back here was a pretty good player for them. They just did not get enough from their star players this season. And that's the ultimate deal. As a head coach, that is your job, is to get your best players to perform. And they just could not get the job done. And as for Brock Sunderland, there's a lot of organizational chaos that went around this organization this year. Clearly, I think the decision to trade Trevor Harris was ultimately an eyebrow raiser for me, just because I thought, he was still better than their options that they still had. And if they were really trying to win games, I think it was probably the right call to hold on to Trevor Harris in that circumstance. So I'm really interested to see what this team does from here, who they hire in the offseason to really guide this organization out of this mess. They really need to start at the ground level. I think they really need to reevaluate who is part of this team core going forward, who is worth keeping. I think a lot of these Canadian guys that they have, Kwaku Boateng, I think he's still a big part of this team going forward. But I think they really need to decide what Canadian receivers they want to build around. Shai Ross had a pretty good season this year. But again, I think he took away from Tavon Smith, who had a really good 2019 rookie season. So I'm interested to see how some of these players factor into the Elks' plans going forward. And it's going to be very interesting to see what veterans comes back, as I discussed in a previous video. So I'm really interested to see what the Elks do this offseason. And then these last two games of the CFL regular season, not a ton you could take away from either of these games. Hamilton, Saskatchewan. Hamilton gets back on the right track against Saskatchewan's backups. I mean, literally a nothing game. The suspense was gone after Montreal fell to Ottawa on Friday night. And Hamilton can come out there and play loose in front of their home fans. Nothing really to take away from this game. I mean, good that the Terracats won, and it's good to see Jeremiah Mazzola getting back in rhythm, but we won't be able to tell, really, if this team is back and ready until this week against Montreal in the playoffs. And then Saskatchewan, there's really nothing to say other than, hopefully Cody Fajardo never gets hurt, because the backup options behind Cody Fajardo just did not impress in this game. We'll see what happens going forward in the playoffs with the Rough Riders, but nothing to take away from this game. It's all about staying healthy and keeping their key guys intact for the playoff run. And then Calgary and Winnipeg, the first 50 minutes of this game started off as probably the worst, or one of the worst, games in the CFL this entire regular season. It was 12-0, 4 field goals for Winnipeg to that point in the game. But Calgary miraculously comes back. They hit a big play to Luther Hukunavanu as a big play threat who's really emerging in the few opportunities he's had this year. Just a really side point there, but he's been a pretty impressive piece for Calgary. Interesting to see how he does going forward. But again, not much you can take away from this game. None of the quarterbacks really looked good in this game at all. It was freezing cold, and there's just really nothing you can take away from this game, given that both of these teams were playing so many backups in this game. But with that said, we closed the book on the 2021 CFL regular season. Be sure to let me know in the comments what you take away from the final week of action. And with that said, I'll see you guys for my playoff prediction, playoff preview videos coming up in the coming days. Peace.